there seem to be quite a few of us who question the nature of reality, question the narrative, who consider ourselves to be introverts. Because I
Hmm.
was thinking about that earlier this morning, and I can't, at this point, I can't remember how many times I've heard Richard call himself an introvert, or how many times I've heard Tony call himself an introvert. Um, so I think it just has something to do with well, number one, it's has something to do with that label. I think there's definitely a stigma that is attached to
Hmm.
that, because there's supposed to be a stigma attached to it. Like, we're supposed to think that there's something wrong with us for not wanting to spend like all of our free time around other people.
Hmm.
I think that's part of the conditioning that takes place. But I just find it interesting because the more people that I meet and interact with who are willing to ask questions and seek answers on their own, almost to a single person, we all call ourselves introverts.
Hmm.
So I don't know. There's definitely something to it. I'm just not quite sure what it is.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I think I don't know. I've just been this way since I was a kid. Like I read the best in isolation, just with nothing around. I can't go to a coffee shop. I just got to be in a room by myself with a book. You know, it's the best way to do it. And also, just yeah, I don't know. It seems like I don't know. It seems like people would not like who I am, so I must put on airs if I am being social, and that's exhausting.
Mhm.
And so every time I do like a family thing, it just takes me a few days to recover, you know, my
Mhm.
energy.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, I've been through that exact experience. I don't even know. I can't count how many times. It's the whole thing of being forced to take part in something that you really don't want to give your energy to at all. And you're doing it out of some sort of sense of obligation to the other people that are there. Um, Again, it's part of, at least as far as I see it. And again, these are all strictly my opinions. I don't have like any empirical evidence that I can
Mm-hmm.
point to. But like, all of these things are part of the crabs in the bucket syndrome, where it's essentially we are used, whether we realize it or not, in order to keep each other in check, so that we can only get to like a certain level of
Mm-hmm.
success or independence in the course of our lives, because we're always going to have like these other things on us, pulling us back down. um,
Hmm.
like, that's a very stark realization, that people kind of have to come to individually, and then make a choice of, uh, I mean, essentially it's a value judgment.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you value your relationship with these other people that you may or may not perceive to be holding you down or holding you back, or not even, maybe not even that, just not contributing to your experience in any positive way.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you value that experience versus whatever it is you would rather be doing? um, that's just something that people kind of have to figure out
Mm-hmm.
on their own. I don't think that's an answer that anybody else can give you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I spent 4 hours at a high school graduation ceremony this weekend. That is a half a day
Yeah,
of
that's
work.
considerable. Yeah, that's a considerable amount of time.
Yeah.
You can do a lot in 4 hours. Hell, I can record 2 episodes of Liberty Radio in 4 hours.
Yeah.
You know,
But yeah, I mean, I I don't know. I felt it was important to go. It's just I think kind of May, early June is a time of a lot of events. People are traveling, people do stuff. So I'm just hoping for a few weeks of just normal routine. I'm one of those weirdos who like does the same thing every single day, every single week. And like any variation of that routine just throws me off.
Well, yeah, it's called a pattern interrupt. And I am exactly the same way. So if you're a weirdo because of that, then I am also a weirdo. But I will wear that badge with pride. I always have throughout the course of my life. But I'm the same way. I like what I like, and I've set things up in my life in very specific ways because that's what works for me, and that's the way that I like them. And for whatever reason, other people who don't understand that, there's actually a method behind what they perceive to be madness, they have no problem interrupting that. Like they think it's okay. They think that there's nothing wrong with imposing themselves on somebody else's situation. But again, that's primarily because that's something that has been done to them throughout the course of their lives. And they see everybody else doing the same thing. So, that registers as, it's okay. It's all right to do that because everybody else does it.
Yeah. Did you know John Stuart Mill like wrote all of his great works in isolation? He would spend 6 months working and then would take half the year off just to go away from society and think. Yeah. It's kind of that's the ideal scenario. To be honest, just go away from everyone.
I hear you on that. Absolutely.
It just sounds so antisocial and like sociopathic when I say that, but it really does sound nice.
No, it does. It's the funny thing is, think about what you just said there. Like if you've actually spent time studying the behavior patterns of sociopaths, they're not antisocial people. They're actually highly gregarious people. They want to be around people primarily because if they are around people, that means they can manipulate people. If they're not around people, they can't manipulate people. But again, like you said, it's one of those logical fallacies that people use as a heuristic. But it's not representative of reality in any way, shape, or form, yet people still cling to it.
Yeah. It's a fable, I guess. It's one of those stories.
One of the stories we tell ourselves. Yep. Yeah. Speaking of stories, how far were you able to get through the book? Did you get through the epilogue?
No, I wasn't able to finish the last chapter, but I'm like 10 pages away from the ending.
Okay.
Yeah, and let's see. The epilogue's not too long either. It's about 10 more pages. So I'm about 20 pages away from the end of the book. So I could finish it in about 20 minutes.
Okay. But did you want to do that now or no? I'm just kidding. That's
well, wait. You got to be in a squat while I do it to make me feel bad for not doing it. Yeah, I mean, it was. Did you learn anything? Did you know all this stuff?
Again, a lot of it I already knew. There were, and I was kind of thinking along those lines as I was reading through the epilogue this morning, and I actually got about halfway through I think it was the acknowledgments, was after the epilogue. It's like 5 pages long. I was like, all right, might as well go ahead and read that too. And then as I was like halfway through that was when I got the notification about Luke live streaming from the Mandarin. So I just put the book down and went on about my day. But I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, there's nothing really new that the author presented me with in this book. Yeah, there are tidbits, right? There are bits and pieces here and there, which not so much presented new information, but just kind of helped to clarify information that I already had, connections between people, timelines, and those sorts of things. But the thing that I thought most about this particular story, and it's a very well crafted story. It's an excellent narrative from beginning to end. I will give the author that much credit. There's a lot of stuff that's left out that I knew about coming into reading this book.
Okay.
Like, there's a lot of stuff that is left out. Like, just all the times that I've pointed out, like, she'll touch on something and then very quickly distance herself from that thing by focusing on something else. Like, every single one of those moments is, an opportunity for her to be able to expand on those stories, and she chooses not to do so. Now, granted, the book is already, several hundred pages long to begin with. I'm sure she wasn't coming into this project looking at writing, a 1,000-page book or a 1,500-page book or anything like that. I'm sure that could easily be done, especially with this program that has a history that goes back more than 60 years. And especially with all of the stuff that they have worked on in their history. But the fact that she chose to focus on the things that she did, to the deliberate detriment of the things that she chose not to focus on, is really what stood out to me more so than anything else. Because while, yes, she does mention like the work that DARPA started doing in the 60s or 70s around what they were calling biocybernetics, she touches on it, right? She makes sure that she puts it in the timeline, but she doesn't really talk about it a whole lot. And then she never really fleshes out that part of the DARPA story throughout the rest of the book. Even once we get up into like after, like, post 9/11 and all the things that DARPA was involved in as far as that is concerned, with, what was going on with the military action in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the research that DARPA was doing to try and aid in those theaters. Like, there's a lot of stuff that she just does not touch on at all. Like, none of the work in genetics, like, she talks about none of that.
Maybe because it's still relevant.
Possibly. And I suppose that's one way you could look at it, because again, she does appear to be approaching this from the standpoint of an insider, somebody who is privileged to be able to talk to the players who were actually, working on these projects, or who were making sure that the funding for these projects went through. So she's probably trying to be careful not to step on any toes. But I don't know. It just seems like there are definite missed opportunities in the telling of this particular story. And some of those missed opportunities, like I said, in previous times that we've gotten together, these were things back in the 60s and the 70s that were taking place, that she spends, a sentence or two on, and then completely glosses over in order to move on to whatever it is she wants to talk about next.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it just seems like she's kind of like emasculated and defanged DARPA to make you think that it's just this like wacky science fiction organization full of a bunch of people who are like silly little boys with dreams, to make you just be like, oh, it's nothing to worry about. Clearly they're failing on all fronts and just have these weird ideas. I mean, it's a great method for making people underestimate an entity or an organization, just to make them think that it's really not capable of much.
Yeah. Well, and I think think about this, because this occurred to me as I was reading about the I forget which chapter it was, 17 or 18 maybe, where they were talking about the autonomous vehicle contest that DARPA
Mm.
did throughout the
Grand
early
challenge.
2000s. Yeah, the Grand Challenge, and how the director at that time, was very enamored of Disney, even to the point where they were holding like their annual conferences at Disneyland, right?
Hmm.
And doing Disney themed stuff for the various research project areas and all of that. And what occurred to me as I was reading through that was the comment that you had made when you first approached me about reading this book, and why you found it interesting just from the standpoint of the title,
Hmm.
right? In that the use of the word Imagineers kind of has this almost Disney-like connotation to it,
Hmm.
right? Um, it started making me wonder if that connection between DARPA and Disney, maybe, maybe it was done deliberately. Maybe it was done in such a way so that while it was somewhat overt, it was actually meant to have more of a subconscious effect on
Hmm.
people. In other words, Disney is the Magic Kingdom, right? The land where dreams come to life, and yada
Hmm.
yada yada, and so on and so forth. All these fantastical ideas. It just seems to me that if you were going to take something that was essentially the bureau that is responsible for creating the latest and greatest killing machines,
Hmm.
which, arguably that's what DARPA is.
Hmm.
Their job is to develop newer, better, and more effective means of killing people.
Hmm.
Attach the connotation of Disney to that in order to conflate the two in people's minds, so that instead of having this negative view of this secretive organization, that the more time goes by, the less the public is actually able to know about exactly what it is that they're working on. Couple that with the whole notion of creating make believe and making it real, and all of these other Disney platitudes that have been shoved down our throats since birth. It really distorts the view of exactly what this particular organization is all about, in my mind anyway. Like, to me, it's just the perfect cover, because you already have this thing Disney, where, when even just saying that name, it's going to have a very specific connotation for individuals, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's positive or negative, when you say the name Disney, people already have an idea of what that means.
Hmm.
So again, tying the two together, as far as I'm concerned, number one, it's a brilliant move, but it's also deliberate from the standpoint of, again, deflecting attention away from what's actually going on.
Hmm. Yeah, agreed. It's yeah, I mean, I took note of the lack of times. So the author, I think, I didn't count, but I think less than 10 times did she use the word kill in this book. And that's literally all they're talking about. So I thought that was pretty definitely on purpose. But it's, yeah. And usually that word is used in quotes. But they're
And
yeah.
also rarely when they're referring to other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, I agree with you. That's a deliberate choice. Yeah, they'll talk about killing a program all day long, or killing a bill of legislation. But when you put kill in person or human being immediately following that word, there's no ambiguity there. People know exactly, what you're talking about when you say that. So you have to, you have to dress up the language in a different way.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, uh, the the science of psychology and behavioral science is not it's not a new one. It's very old. And they were very obviously very interested in kind of affecting psychology and behavior. So I think that these people operate with that in mind. And everybody does so to an extent, right? I'm saying words right now to affect you cognitively. But I think people like this understand how powerful language is and are using it deliberately to paint a picture in your head that is what they would like it to be. So just, yeah, just even the fact that Disney and DARPA are now associated in reality, it's going to just distort what you think of DARPA. Even if it was just a tangential association, you just have those two concepts associated in your mind like that, changes the nature of both of them. But yeah, I mean, it just seems like they, at one point, there was somebody who was quoted saying that the agency has no like memory of itself. And I think that was probably, I mean, they probably did that on purpose. I mean, it seems like every director has had a the job of reforming, killing the old DARPA and reforming it into something that is more palatable. And so what we've ended up with is the Disney DARPA, where it used to be the DARPA of like sending people into Vietnam with briefcases of cash and spraying foliage with Agent Orange and, dropping cluster bombs and burning forests and stuff like that. That can't go. That can't fly. Now it's got to be imagination and robots and, talking computers, and that's definitely, they mentioned Star Trek, they mentioned Star Wars. It's almost like it's like art, it's like life imitating art,
or art imitating life. Because again, anyone who has done a fair amount of research into things like Star Trek or Star Wars, which are fantastic references, by the way, especially revolving around the Disneyfication, we'll call it, of DARPA. Those were very specifically crafted narratives that were fed to the public, again, to propagate very specific ideas. Especially Star Trek. Like, if you really start breaking down the psychology behind the phenomenon of Star Trek, one of the things that I started to understand was this was a way to program the populace at large, or at least the people who are going to come in contact with this thing and kind of glom onto it. It was a way to program them very early on to accept the notion of things like one world government, right? Because there are no countries in Star Trek, right?
Just
like
the
you
Federation.
There's just the Federation. And you come from Earth. Now, you might have been born in New York or Los Angeles or Beijing or Istanbul or wherever, but primarily you come from Earth. And there's kind of a similar thing with Star Wars as well, where it's that goes a little bit more in a different direction than what Roddenberry initially did with Star Trek. But the fact that they keep using these properties to feed these various narratives into the public at large is very interesting. And I'm not saying that, these are the only two things that that have been used as vehicles for this purpose, because that's absolutely not true. There are tons of examples that we can point to, but just kind of the staying power of Star Trek or Star Wars and its ability to capture not only adult members of the public at large, but especially children. Like, that's where I think the greatest power in those types of narrative vehicles are. Because again, you can tell an adult anything you want until you're blue in the face. If they don't buy it, they don't buy it. It's not likely to change 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But if you can get a child, right? If you can get a 5-year-old or 7-year-old or a 10-year-old and get them believing in a specific idea that, that they carry with them through the rest of their life, well, then they're always going to carry that with them through the rest of their life.
Disney's very good at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The young minds. Help, that's what they have a lot of. Well, I mean, they have a lot of children's programs about, like invention and imagination, and they do a lot of that sort of. It's easier for children to suspend disbelief. So when you have these people who are like frantically searching for a way to, I don't know, have a robot have a robot car be able to drive, right? You need sort of like almost improbable ideas that at least you can use as a launching point. But if everybody's just thinking very conventionally and it's almost like there's a lot of constraint on the adult mind. So they're looking for ways to kind of open that up. And I mean, definitely LSD would be one of those things that would help kind of revert you into a childlike suggestible state. Also, the Disney, I feel like Disney is definitely a psychedelic experience in my mind, with all of the a life-size mouse that talks with wears gloves, like that is straight out of like a schizophrenic episode. So yeah. I mean,
I've seen a lot crazier things on LSD, but yeah, that wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. So I think that was probably one of the reasons why they kind of embraced the Disney, and they were really desperate for anything that works. They're like, guys, just throw ideas on the wall, see if it sticks. We'll give it a shot because we don't have anything else. The way that she has authored the story, it makes me think that none of these people really knew what they were doing. Like they just kept trying things and nothing was working. And so they had to like outsource a lot of their thinking.
Well, the other thing too with that, and you kind of touched on it a little bit ago, is one of the things that is really clear kind of throughout this particular story that the author has laid out is that the longer that DARPA has been in existence, the more compartmentalized it has become. In other words, from decade to decade, you can see that like the various offices within the organization communicate with each other less and less, and it's really just the managers who go about passing information back and forth between the various working groups and whatnot. which is pretty much the way the military wants everything done. Like they even back to like the scientists that were working on the Manhattan Project, a lot of them didn't know that they were working on weapons. They were just given a specific task to perform and figure out the best way to do it. They didn't know ultimately what that work was going to be used for. And I think in a lot of ways, that structure or that framework was transferred from what they knew worked with the Manhattan Project, because, you know, obviously it allowed them to develop the greatest explosive capability man has ever known. And they applied it to this new research organization, you know, that ostensibly was supposed to create the future weapons of war or whatever. Even though a lot of times it ends up creating things that are more beneficial in the civilian world than are in the world of the military. But I think that just kind of goes to the structure of the organization itself, in that, yeah, they do have a little bit of freedom as far as the project managers go, of trying to come up with their own ideas of what would be beneficial to the military. But I think the author does a very poor job of pointing out that there have been times where DARPA was specifically tasked with projects in order, you know, the Army or the Navy or whomever would come to DARPA and say, we want to be able to do this, figure out how to get it done. Like she doesn't spend a whole lot of time focusing on those projects as much as she does the ones that that people at DARPA came up with on their own, and then, you know, we're trying to champion to the upper echelon of military leadership. So there's kind of a give and take there, because any technology that the military chooses to invest money into is always going to be something that they consider quote unquote dual purpose or dual use technology. Right. They want to make sure that it has not only military applications so that they can use it in war for the purpose of killing people. They also want to make sure that they can then repackage and resell that technology to the population at large for a profit. Like that's always been.
Yeah, I know. I saw dual use and I was like, oh, Jesus, there it is again.
Yeah, and that's a term that you will encounter over and over again when it comes to talking about the military. You're always going to see the term dual use.
Yeah, there was that, let's see. The first, I thought it was interesting how DARPA was acting as a kind of like an investment scheme for a moment. Again, it's just like outsourcing. It's just, all of this is a bunch of people like playing with, it seems just like kids in a science class, just like playing with $1 million toys and seeing what they've come up with. That's how at least comes off to me.
Well, I mean, there is a point where one of the directors of DARPA refers to Vice President Dick Cheney, then Vice President Dick Cheney, as a person who likes pictures. Yeah, apparently he's not a big reader, and the guy said actually verbatim, you know, you give him a cartoon, that's what he wants. He doesn't want like a presentation with a bunch of words that he has to read through. You give him the pictures and get the idea across to him, and yeah, that's good.
Jeez. Me like picture. Me like that picture.
Like that absolutely tickled me when I read that.
Yeah, me too. I was like, of course. Sounds like Trump.
Yeah, in many ways. In many ways it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they really had to kind of pitch their ideas to people in order to get them funded, or just to not have their funding cut, which I think is probably good. They need to justify their existence, but I don't know. It just didn't seem like a genuine investment of capital into labor, with the intention of generating innovation. Like at one point, they were talking about how either within 6 months you meet a goal or your project is terminated.
Hmm.
Right. Um, and it's very ends based methodology,
Hmm.
for coming up with inventions, which I get. It's not really a way to come up with anything great. Just it's the least publishable product, right? That's like how all research is done. You just write something, you got to just prove something. It doesn't have to be significant at all, just
Hmm.
anything. But
Yeah.
what do
When I
you
was,
think? Oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say when I was younger, I don't know how much the term actually gets used anymore. But when I was younger, the term that would have been used to describe that type of method would be cookie cutter, which
Hmm.
whenever I would hear that word would tell me, oh, okay, there's not really any thought that went into this. You just took
Hmm.
the implements you were given and you made the shape and passed it along.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, it becomes not about the original. It's like how we were talking about a few weeks ago. It's not a the institution is no longer about the original idea. It's about making sure the institution exists in the future.
mhm.
So at that point, you lose all of the sort of operations aren't genuine.
Mhm.
It's just about making sure it doesn't die. Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true of pretty much anything. Like
mhm.
I can take that same idea and apply it literally to my own existence, right? So,
Yeah.
in other words, if I spend the vast majority of my time and energy planning for 5 years down the road, but I don't actually pay attention to like, oh, well, I need to eat some food today and I should probably take a shower. Otherwise, people might find me offensive. And these sorts of things that you have to do just as like, uh, getting along day to day
Hmm.
in your own existence. And I instead focus all of my time and effort on 5 years from now. I'm not going to get to 5 years from now.
Hmm.
Like it's really that simple.
Hmm. Well, I feel like what's happening, what happens here is actually the opposite. So they just try to get through every day without actually thinking long term, because they want things now. It doesn't matter what they are.
Hmm.
But in the legacy of DARPA, they're coming up with all of these really shitty experiments and having to pass them along to people who are more responsible and can actually develop them into something that's usable. Um, so they don't really have the long term idea. Well, the long term concept for them is just that DARPA is there doing stuff, right?
Mhm.
It's not dead. Um, they don't care what it takes to get them there. So they're just throwing out these really crappy, like half baked things, to just get to that.
Yeah, but then the problem is people realize that those products are crappy and they're not really serving a purpose and nobody wants them. So then their funding gets cut.
Right. Well, I think that's why you see this like turnover,
Mhm.
because somebody's like, well, if we just put somebody else in there, things will change. But the institution, it just wants to justify its existence. It doesn't really want anything else. It doesn't care about anything else other than why would it care? It has no incentive to.
Yeah.
It it's not I mean, they don't care about any of the people in the wars. They just care about getting funding.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And getting their project supported in Congress.
yeah, I mean, you see the best innovations happen when people give a shit. Like, there were a lot of great inventions at the start of the agency when there was actually kind of like an existential stake, right, for Americans in the world and the American way of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you saw it again in like the 70s when ARPANET was created. So I think that they have like these moments of, all right, well, I guess we should let DARPA do its thing because it's like kind of coming through on these very important moments. But the rest of it is just bizarre. It's like they're trying to, I don't know, have people be able to go days without eating. I don't see the practical applications of that.
Well, I mean, taken out of context, that it could be a difficult thing to justify. But I don't know. I may be digging down a little bit too deep on that point, but there are always going to be applications in wartime that are not going to be obvious at any given moment. And I think sometimes they spent a little bit too much time and energy and obviously funding on things that didn't seem obvious that actually ended up having no real application. Or as I keep saying, that is at least the story that is being presented to us. Because again, a couple of things that really jumped out at me going through this part of the book, where it's more of the history that I've actually lived through, and was conscious of what was going on while I was living through it. Like when she talks about, she references obviously 9/11 and the role that developed for DARPA after that, and she talks a little bit about the lead up to the events of 9/11. Like everything that she lays out is official narrative, and most of it is stuff that has already been proven false, even though the government continues to present it as official narrative. She does not deviate from that at all. Like even to the point, let me find it. There was a point where she references the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. For some reason, I don't exactly remember why it was that she brought up this particular event. Nowhere in talking about it does she ever recognize the fact that we actually have irrefutable evidence now that the FBI was involved in that incident. Like we have official documents that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the FBI was involved in the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center. She makes absolutely no mention of that whatsoever.
Well, because then it would convolute the whole reason why people needed to be spied on, right?
I suppose.
Because then it makes what DARPA is doing seem like, well, you don't really need to do that since you could just ask the intelligence community what they're doing.
Right. But I mean, it brings up that question in my mind. Is she doing this because she doesn't know that information, or is she doing it because she does know that information and she doesn't want to spread it around? Like another one that really ticked me off. And so much so that it actually made me make a note about it so that I could talk about it, was she, I think it was when she was talking about, what chapter is this? Yeah, chapter 17. when she begins to touch on the whole Total Information Awareness Program.
Mhm.
She references an NBC News report that came out in 1975, right, by a guy named Ford Rowan. And anybody who has looked into the origins of the internet and how it was developed and how it came to be a consumer technology knows this report. Like this is not anything new as far as I'm concerned, nor anybody who had looked into the history of the internet before. Everybody should know the Ford Rowan report, right? And she says that this report claimed that a excuse me, that a secret network linked the White House, the CIA, the Defense Department, the FBI, and the Treasury. And then she goes on to say that that report was completely false. But she doesn't say why the report was completely false. She just says that it was. And then again, as she has done pretty much the entire book, moves on to the next thing. That statement of a secret network that linked these different agencies within the government was actually technically kind of true. Now, what was false about it was that, like, the FBI couldn't go to the White House and get into their database, right? Or the CIA couldn't go to the Defense Department and get into their database. But all of these different departments were actually using the same computer network. So they were technically linked to one another. They just didn't have end user access to each other's databases. All they had to do was make a request to the other agency for specific information. And more often than not, those requests were granted and the information was passed along. So what was being presented in that 1975 report was actually very, very factual in that these departments were linked and they could within minutes get information that belonged to one of the others that they wouldn't otherwise have. But every time this report is presented in the mainstream narrative, it is held up as conspiracy theory.
Debunked.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
got one thing wrong, the whole thing's out.
Right. But it amazed me that she went to this particular thing. Because again, this is something that has been shown, we're talking almost 50 years now, that yes, this was an actual thing. This could be done. It couldn't be done in the way that she's presenting it, because it, again, in my opinion, it's being done deliberately to deflect your attention away from this thing. But yes, all those agencies were linked to each other on the same computer network. It was a government computer network. It was part of the work that was developed by DARPA. Oh, and by the way, most people don't know that the internet that we use is not actually the same internet that the military uses. They're two completely separate systems that were developed side by side with one another. Which,
and why wouldn't they be linked? Why wouldn't they? That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't they talk? Why wouldn't the intelligence community talk to each other?
Because at the time, it would have been seen as government overreach, right? Because it would all go back to the privacy issue of, Big Brother and the government having too much access to the lives of its citizens and their private affairs. And yada, 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 so on and so forth. And that's the way it has always been, is that these various law enforcement agencies were supposed to be separate from one another in order to protect the individual. But then, lo and behold, we have the catastrophic catalyzing event of that day in September. And all of a sudden now everybody, they need to start sharing information with one another because it's national security.
Sure. Anything for national security. Yeah. Is it worth the price you pay? Is safety worth the price you pay?
Never.
It's not.
Thomas Jefferson said that. believe it
Really?
was Thomas Jefferson, wasn't it? Yeah, is the man that chooses to trade his
Oh,
privacy for security deserves neither, or something
right.
like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I read in Watership Down. That's where I got it. um, yeah, one thing that's stuck out to me was I cannot find the page this is on, but she was talking about how with the end of the Soviet Union, DARPA was kind of facing an existential threat where there's like no new threats abroad or anything, and they're like, well, we don't really know what to do. They're kind of just like fiddling their thumbs and not really sure how they're going to continue their existence. And then all of a sudden, wow, there's terrorists, right?
Mhm.
There's an asymmetrical threat,
Mhm.
um, which is what, which is, I mean, they even talk about how that could be just one person. So really, anybody's the enemy now. It's not just a state. It's not just a government. It's not a
Mhm.
cabal. It
That's
can
right.
be literally anyone.
And they could be right behind you.
Hmm.
Ultimate boogeyman.
Oh, that's the old, yeah, exactly. Could be your best friend.
Yeah.
And how
I,
can you trust anyone at that point?
I will say another one of the things that really jumped out at me when I read it, again, kind of going back a little bit in the conversation, but it was involving the DARPA director Tony Tether, who was in charge of the agency in the aughts for the most part. He directly referenced H.G. Wells
Hmm.
by name,
Hmm.
all right, as an example of who DARPA program managers should aspire to be like.
Hmm.
H.G. Wells, the
Hmm.
eugenicist.
Hmm.
Like, again, is this a case of like you don't know the history of this man and you just think he was an incredible science fiction writer, or you do know the history of this man and that's exactly the type of people you're looking for? Which one of
Yeah.
those things is it?
Well, that doesn't even matter. The point is that he's making a reference to something that could be that is two things. It's ambiguous, and it's up to you to choose. That's that power where it's like, well, whatever conclusions that you draw are yours. I didn't say anything. Um, but he's winking, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It,
It's definitely on purpose.
yeah, I mean, in my opinion, and again, I haven't done a whole lot of research on Tony Tether. Most of what I know about the man is drawn from this particular work and the very little bit of like side research that I've done in the course of reading the book. But he seems like he was a very deeply disturbed man to me, and probably still is to this day. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but just the limited amount of information that I have to go on does not paint him in a very favorable light at all.
Yeah.
And of course, his successor. Oh,
Regina
geez.
Dugan.
Oh my God.
I read that name. That's where just about where I stopped, and I was like, oh, I have an association with uh, I don't even know how to describe it, just like a power bitch.
Hmm. Okay. What would you like to learn more?
Sure.
Because I read that name and I was like, wow, I've heard that name before. I need to
Yeah.
find out where I
Yeah.
have heard that name before. So, as I usually do, I went to the Book of Knowledge and looked at what exactly Miss Dugan or Mrs. Dugan, I don't know if it's married name or not, what she is known for. Well, she is
Hmm.
known for being the first female director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Um, among other things, let's see, she's worked with the Army Corps of Engineers, received awards from the United States Secretary of Defense. She's a highly decorated lady when it comes to the United States military. Um, let's see, took positions at the Naval Research Academy Committee, the Threat Reduction Agency.
I've heard of them before.
Uh-huh. After leaving DARPA in March of 2012, she was appointed to an executive position at Google.
Oh.
Uh-huh. There, she led and created the Advanced Technology and Projects division at Motorola Mobility, who was a subsidiary of Google at that time. A couple of years later, Motorola was sold to Lenovo, but Google actually retained that particular division. They didn't let that go to Lenovo.
Mm-hmm.
Most recently, in May of 2020, Regina Dugan was announced as the CEO of Welcome Leap.
Hmm.
Yeah. So she's got her
weird.
hands in a whole bunch of stuff that's not good for the rest of us. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Welcome Leap,
I know Welcome Trust.
Yes, Welcome Leap is an offshoot of Welcome Trust.
Okay.
Whitney Webb did a fantastic article on her website, Unlimited Hangout, maybe about a year ago at this time, that was centered completely around Welcome Leap and exactly what it is that they're working on. And as I stated, it is nothing good for the rest of us because it is all about biocybernetics, implantable technology, control grid, hardware and software, like all of the technocratic stuff that they want to implement over the course of the next, 5 to 25 years, getting us to 2050 and their utopic vision of what the future is supposed to be. Really, really dark stuff.
All of those dual use technologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting. So I bet she's, well, yeah. It's just weird how all these people kind of coalesce at Google.
Isn't it interesting?
And she also did work for Facebook, joining a team called Building 8. What is that?
I'm trying to remember. I think because I tried to look it up and didn't have much success with it. I've run across Building 8 before. I want to say that Building 8 has something, it's either to do with artificial intelligence, or Building 8 was the team that helped put the metaverse together. It's one of those two things. It might actually even be both. Because I think Building 8 might have been, and again, this is not authoritative by any means. This is me literally trying to pull stuff out of the deep recesses of my brain. I want to say it was like the advanced research division of Facebook, if I'm not mistaken. They just gave it this innocuous title like Building 8, so that most people would look at it and go, "Huh, well, that's a weird name," and just keep moving.
Well, it just makes me think of Building 7.
Well, true. But yeah, she is intimately involved in a lot of the transhumanist agenda.
So she's out, right? Do we know who the current director is?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's still that Indian woman or not. Let me see.
Let's see. Victoria Coleman became the director of DARPA in November 2020. Recent years, Victoria Coleman. Ooh, she is an interesting person.
Ooh, tell me. Oh, wow. Good Lord. She looks like a tea person.
A what?
She really looks like a tea person.
Like drinks tea?
No, like a word that begins with T, and ends
Oh,
with
oh,
Rands.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, she looks like a Dr. Levine.
Whew, yeah.
It's very unfortunate for her if she is not. I will say that.
Yeah. Um, DARPA's Microsystems Exploratory Council. She's Greek.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know where they're going. I have a feeling that they're kind of looking into swarm technology where they're trying to come from the God, these freaking dogs, sorry. They're trying to come from the perspective of like the insurgents, right? They're trying to be everywhere all at once and nowhere at the same time. Because they can't go any bigger. You can't go any bigger than a nuclear bomb. But you can go way smaller. You can go nanotechnology. I think that's where they're very much going. Smart dust, that kind of stuff. But then from there, I don't know.
Well, I don't know. To me, it's kind of obvious. From there, you actually go into the individuals with nanobots.
Well,
like
yeah.
I mean, it's the whole reason why they're trying to make this big push now for putting implantables in people's brains, because they know that they can use these various technologies, whether it's electrical stimulation, whether it's sound waves, microwaves, whatever. Like if they can get direct access to the literal gray matter inside of the average human being, they can make them do whatever they want. They know that.
It's a whole new frontier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there will be a very small section of people who are willing to kind of go along with that. I think that they're going to have a really hard time finding volunteer participants. So they probably go to Fort Detrick for that. Looking for guinea pigs.
Well, here's the interesting thing, because again, I consume a lot of media, and probably more than the average person should. But if you listen to the speeches given by a man named Nolan Bushnell, who has worked at NASA over the course of the last several decades, he is not shy at all about letting people know that there are hundreds of thousands of people in the world right now, as we speak, that have already put implantable technology into their brains. So it's being done. It's already happening.
Okay. I'll have to look into that. I just find that unbelievable.
I mean, I'm not saying that I disagree with you, right? I'm not saying that the majority of people are just going to line up for this stuff and be like, yeah, put it right here.
They must be chronically ill people.
That's some of them. Some of them are wounded veterans. Some of them are people with other congenital defects, like people born without the ability to hear or without the ability to see, or these sorts of things. But like I say, the important thing that he says to me is that we don't have hundreds of people in the world with them now. We don't have thousands of people in the world with them now. We have hundreds of thousands. Now, that could be an indirect way of saying we have millions of people in the world with technology implanted into their brains now. Like he could be skirting around that to make it seem like it's much farther off than what it actually is. But again, you look at the CEO of Nokia when he was at the World Economic Forum 2 weeks ago, and he's saying yeah, by the time we get to 2030, we actually want to be putting the cell phones directly in
Mm-hmm.
your body. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to have handsets anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's they're not shy about saying this is what we're working towards, and this is when we expect to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we know what the roadmap is, or vaguely we know kind of what the terrain looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of, like you say, how are they going to end up convincing a majority of the population that this is something that they want to do?
Oh, well, like, I mean, people are very, again, suggestible. But what's important is to kind of advertise alongside that the why they don't want it, right? So you can be charged with a crime like Minority Report. All you need is the intent. The intent is a very large part of a lot of criminal convictions, right? Did you have the intention to do X? So that's I think that's where they're trying to go. They want to predict people's behavior, so they want to understand people's intentions. So that, and you know, it's a degradation of willpower, or the will, or free will, really. If your conditions are such that you really are not making any choices, the choices are given to you, they already know which ones you're going to make, and they just make those easier. Where is your free will?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Where's your
literally
agency?
you're just walking down a hallway with no doors. So, and that is very predictable. You go from the beginning of the hallway to the end of the hallway. That is the goal, is being able to look at a set of people and know what they're going to do. I mean, that's justifiable for national security interests. Why wouldn't they be looking at that? They want to know who's a terrorist, right? They want to know who is spreading misinformation, right? There are many reasons why somebody might not want to take part in that kind of grand experiment and get a brain chip, that I can't imagine the argument that could be given to convince me to get one. But again, like the FDA commissioner, Rob Califf, says, people who are sick or in pain are much more willing to take massive risk. They are much more willing to be surveyed.
Mm-hmm.
So those new medical devices, that is who you will target the initial phases of experimentation to, because you can give the glimmer of hope that you, having been paralyzed for 20 years, may, out of some technological miracle, be able to move your legs or feel your legs again.
Well, and you may have hit on the answer right there of how they will convince a large portion of the population to, implant their cell phone directly into their brain.
That's the only way.
Yeah, through discomfort, essentially.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, again, I think it's very odd that there's a very sharp increase in like weird debilitating illnesses, and there's a lot of pain, a lot of people kind of suffering, and that's a great position for people who want to kind of get these medical devices or drugs on the market because they need a population to test them on. Mm-hmm. So it's a fantastic coincidence for them. Doesn't benefit anybody else, but them. and you just so happen to have a huge advocate for this kind of stuff in like a very high position of power at a very highly regarded regulatory agency for these particular things, just at the exact moment all this stuff is going to be starting to be literally put in people's heads.
Right when you need them, just in time.
Just in time. It's just weird how these people kind of get into power right when you need them to be there. Almost like there was like a timeline or like an agenda. Pretty
Yeah,
bizarre.
it does kind of seem that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Did you get a chance to watch any of Luke's live stream from the Mandarin?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was I'm going to throw a little bit of shade again. I've been doing it all weekend. But that's cuz nobody's really pushing back on me for it. But I thought it was very interesting that Luke, came all the way up here from Florida, which I know is probably I think it's like an 18-hour drive, depending on where he was in Florida.
Wow.
And yet you have the Beanie compound is 45 minutes away from where I am right now, and probably about 90 minutes with traffic from where the hotel is in DC. And Luke was there, but there was nobody there from the Timcast news organization. Wow. I guess they had more important things to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I think as far as I can tell, it looks like an impenetrable fortress, like a castle, with parapets and snipers. I'm sure they have snipers all on those roofs and in those adjacent buildings. So there's a lot of pressure coming off the building. So I don't see a way you could get in there unless you were like very good at disguise, and I don't think that would even work. But
well, I'm remarking more from the standpoint of here is somebody holding themselves out as we're going to cover news objectively. And this is, clearly news. Even though it was kind of dropped very I don't even know if it was done deliberately or accidentally, but it's something that came about in sort of a breaking style, right? And most news organizations are going to pride themselves on the fact that they're able to cover breaking news when it happens. And there's just like, dude, you're literally less than 2 hours drive, and you claim to be a news organization, and these people have not gotten together in over 2 years, and all of a sudden it just happens right down the road from you, and nothing, crickets.
At least go.
Like basically he's doing the exact same thing that every other mainstream media news outlet is doing, that he criticizes repeatedly. So, okay, now how are you any better than the people that you criticize on a regular basis? That's kind of the point that I'm getting at.
Makes you look silly.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, especially when your buddy Luke comes from like almost half a country away.
Yeah.
In order to do the coverage.
He's the only one there. It's pretty interesting how it's very empty, seemed like, from his video. There's nobody. Like, what if, people can't leave if there's huge crowds, they're not going to run people over. So why not just try to get as many people out there as possible, put a little bit more pressure on them? What are they going to do? Shoot us? They're going to try to disperse the crowd. Might. Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's not going to look very good, is it? You have to be able to, you have to be willing to put them in a position to look bad by compromising your own safety.
That's true.
So that's the only way. I mean, that's why peaceful protests work, because you're forcing the hand of somebody else and you're saying, look at what they did. I didn't do anything. It was just here. And I mean, when the stakes are so high, when there's literally a nuclear war that could be the outcome of such a meeting, I think it's justifiable to want answers about what's happening. It's
Yeah, I
our
would agree.
fate at stake, not just theirs. So how can you hold somebody accountable for something you don't, if you don't know what they've done? And which is the point of secret meetings, is to say, well, it wasn't, we didn't know, we didn't do anything, we didn't make any decisions, whatever, even though they might have. So I don't know.
I don't know. I'm beginning to form the opinion that this particular meeting was probably a lot bigger than ones that have taken place in the past. Kind of similar back to the one that took place in 2017, I think it was, which was where they were starting to formulate the strategy that they were going to use moving into the decade of the 2020s, or at least that's by all accounts what was being done at that particular meeting based on the reports that that people were providing from it. I think there's probably a lot of, and again, speculation on my part, but I think there were probably a lot of decisions that were being made about what the remainder of the decade of the 2020s is going to look like. Almost certainly what the next 3 years are going to look like, leading us up to 2025.
Was Borla there?
Yes, he was.
Oh, they must have been talking about their mRNA shots.
Borla was there. The don't remember the name right off the top of my head, but the other pharma representative that was there was the CEO of GlaxoSmithKline, which you may or may not know at one time used to be called GlaxoSmith Wellcome.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so isn't Jeremy Farrar involved with Wellcome Trust?
Yes.
Okay.
He is I think he's the director of the trust, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah. He was, I don't think he was there, but Mark Carney, the one-time head of the Central Bank of England, as well as the Central Bank of Canada, was in attendance, as was the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, who also just happens to be a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Funny how that works.
Well, remember how the author sort of framed the like venture capitalist leg of DARPA as a way to cut through red tape?
Yes.
So when you see all of these organizations and companies doing the exact same thing, just know they're doing so to cut through red tape.
Well, and think about this as well, because I thought it was interesting. Again, another kind of admission by omission, if you will. She focused heavily on DARPA trying to act as a venture capital company in the 1980s, and supposedly it failed more than it succeeded, and they stopped doing it. And then within 10 years, you have the CIA developing their own venture capital firm, InQtel, which then goes on to help fund things like Google and Facebook and so on and so forth. So it's, again, almost like DARPA was tasked to provide the proof of concept work to say, yeah, this is something we can actually do. And then once they were able to prove that it worked, they're like, oh, okay, well, now we need to get it out of the public eye so we can use it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
total information awareness never died. It just went black. Just like everything else.
That's correct. Do you want to get together again next week and dive a little bit deeper into that? Because I think there's a lot that can be discussed there.
Sure. And I'll kind of look into some of these, see if I can find anything out about anything, because I'll be done with that by then, and then we can just kind of go down some rabbit holes.